only on Nintendo Ultra 64. Killer Instinct.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. This time we're going to take a look at the Nintendo 64, or as we knew it and expected it to be called, the Nintendo Ultra 64. There was loads of information in magazines about this new console coming out and we couldn't wait. It looked really interesting, and not to mention that call out at the start of Killer Instinct. Available in 1995, we didn't even get this console till March 1997 in the UK. The first Killer Instinct game never even made it to the Nintendo 64, but we did get a perfectly adequate version on the Super Nintendo, still hanging in there, and what a great conversion this game was. This was part of the 5th generation of consoles, the Sega Saturn, the Sony PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, and even a couple of outsiders in the Atari Jaguar and the 3DO. We've looked at the Sega Saturn before, and we will get around to looking at the PlayStation, and I think the N64 was the last of those consoles to be released for that generation. So it had quite a lot to live up to. This whole generation was quite a big step up in gaming for me. I think at the time I was probably still playing my Commodore Amiga. I don't think I had a current generation console at that time. And I guess it kind of was the CD-ROM technology that made some of these fantastic advancements possible. Massive games and fantastic orchestral soundtracks. Something that the N64 couldn't really do with just a cartridge, and it did end up hurting the system. But let's take a look. I still think the N64 is an absolutely fantastic looking console. 4 controller ports out the box meant this was absolutely ready to go for couch play multiplayer games. Yeah, you can do the same on other systems, but you're probably going to have to buy a multi-tap multiplayer adapter. This thing is just ready to go. Something I never had back in the day was the expansion pack, but I do have one now. This adds an extra 4 megabytes of graphic memory to the system so you can run games in slightly higher resolution mode. The disadvantage of that is a lot of the games actually run a lot slower than they would with the stock system, so it's not an essential buy, this one. Just kind of a curiosity. You do have a few options to connect this to your TV, but none are really perfect. You've got RF, which is the worst of the worst, you've got composite, you've got SCART, but none of them are going to look very good. The best solution off the shelf is get one of these HDMI converters. This lets you hook it up to a modern TV without much trouble. But I will say, if you hook this up to a modern TV rather than your old 15-inch one you were using back in 1998, it's going to look pretty horrible. And if you want to get true HDMI out, it's going to cost you a lot of money to mod it. I think at this point all these consoles of this generation suffered from this problem. Bad quality outputs. And the N64 is probably the worst of the lot. It's got very blurry textures anyway, and they just don't look very good on a modern TV. Honestly, at this point, and I know a lot of people aren't going to like this, I would say emulate these games. Emulate them, upscale them to 4K. You can play them in 4K, you can play with them with wireless controllers, you've got no trouble with save packs or anything like that. It's just the way to go. The N64 controller was quite interesting when it first came out. I remember trying to use my hand on the left hand side with the digital controller to control the analog stick initially. It took a bit of time to get used to this. I'll be honest, I don't mind this controller. I like the buttons, I like the D-pad. I don't like the analog stick. It's never felt that great to me. The N64 also had the Rumble Pack. Now I'm not sure if this is the first console that had force feedback, but I remember going out and buying this thing. It wasn't that expensive, it was only like £15 or something, but I remember buying this as soon as it came out, plugged it into my console, it vibrated a bit, meh. And I'm kind of the same impression with Rumble force feedback today. It doesn't really add anything to a game in my opinion, but you may think otherwise and that's absolutely fine. Like a lot of people, I sold all my stuff back in the day and rebought it later on when I wanted a taste of nostalgia. And when I started rebuying these things, you realise how expensive things have gotten. I just wanted to pick up a few games, the ones that I played back in the day that I really enjoy, but things get really expensive. If you buy a full boxed game with instructions and everything, the costs go absolutely stupid. And the boxes are in really poor condition. If you check eBay, some of the condition of these boxes, I mean, they look like they've been thrown around the room and stamped on. So I decided when I started out collecting for this system, I was just going to go cart only, just buy the cartridges, forget the boxes, waste of time. But I think collecting cart only, you do lose something of the experience with these games, so after a while I decided let's buy all the instructions for the games that I have got. All the kart games, let's go on eBay and find the instructions. And it took quite a long time, probably about 2 years checking all in, but I managed to get the instructions for every single game I own. So then you've got the option of buying reproduction boxes, reproduction N64 game boxes to display, but in the end I went the universal game case route. These fit a bunch of different game formats, and this is probably what N64 games should have come as back in the day. A nice strong plastic case that holds the cartridge and your instructions. And I think they look really good. I think they look far better than a battered old box bought from eBay. So this is the way I wanted to go. Some of these look absolutely fantastic. They've spent so much time making sure the artwork is correct. However, they are not all perfect. Some of them, I'm obviously in the UK, so I'm trying to find PAL versions of these boxes ideally. Some of the American ones are a bit easier to find, but the PAL ones are a bit harder to find. And there's some really bad ones out there, like this one where they've basically scanned in the box, including the stickers that were stuck on the box, and it looks terrible. So hopefully they get new versions of this come out. I'll print them out and add them to the case. But this is the way to go. Kart only, instructions, universal game case. But a console is nothing without its games, so let's take a look at the ones that I own, why I own them, and the games that I would recommend to you in my top 5. So you got to start off with Super Mario 64. This was one of the launch games for the system. Forgive the aspect ratio, I couldn't find my TV remote at the time, and I know there's that guy in the comments who hates 16:9 and 4:3 aspect ratio problems, but there it is. I've always preferred cartridges over CD, much more reliable, and even after years and years they work without problem. Not to mention almost near instant loading as well, a real benefit of the system, and its downfall. But we'll get to that later on. As I've said before, I'm not the biggest Mario or Sonic fan in the world, but even I can appreciate this game was absolutely incredible when it came out. Really nice and colourful, great sound, great playability, and although I'm not the biggest fan of playing it, I do like watching speedruns of this game. People doing speedruns of this games and tool-assisted speedruns, trying to beat it as fast as you can, finding new glitches. I find it really interesting, so you couldn't do much better than this for a launch game. Top Gear 64 is a game you can pick up really cheap, and I picked this back up in the day and I really liked it. Playing it these days, I'm not so sure. The controls seem pretty bad on this one. However, I must have liked it back in the day because I really played this one. I really liked it. It had like a car designer thing, or a decal designer where you could design the patterns and logos and stuff for the side of your car. And I remember making mine look like the Lancia from Sega Rally. Spent loads of time on it and really enjoyed it. But yeah, this game is really cheap. I think it will cost you about £10. It is still worth picking up, but might need a bit of time to get used to those controls, unfortunately. It's like driving on an ice rink. I think Wave Race was another release game for the system, and what a brilliant one this was. This came out at just the perfect time for me. One of my friend's family had a jet ski business, jet skis on lakes where you can bring your own jet ski or hire out one of theirs, and being mates with the guy, we got nice cheap jet ski rides which we absolutely loved. So this came along at absolutely the perfect time. We really liked this, and the graphics were absolutely fantastic, obviously blurry on a modern TV, but really nice and colourful. And the water physics, I know we're talking, late 90s water physics, but it really worked well. Jumping off waves, jumping off ramps, doing subs, going under the water and stuff, and racing, and not being able to turn unless you're accelerating, just like a real jet ski. This one's a brilliant game and absolutely worth picking up. I really love the Wipeout games on the Sony PlayStation, so when I heard there was a version for the N64, of course I was going to pick it up. If you take this as a pure racing game, it's absolutely brilliant. Unfortunately, you are of course going to compare it to the PlayStation version, which has obviously got CD music, which obviously the N64 has to do a rough approximation of. The graphics aren't quite as good, but it is a great racing game, this one. Unfortunately, back in the day, I had a bit of trouble with this. I think I got to the end of level 2, or one of the big races, and the game would crash, it would just freeze. And I looked this up on the internet being a fairly new thing back then, and there was actually a bad batch of these Wipeout 64 games that had a percentage chance of crashing at a certain point. So you had to save really often. I haven't worked out if my latest cartridge actually does this. It's not the one I had back in the day. Fingers crossed it doesn't. It is a great game though, and worth picking up. Zelda Ocarina of Time is probably my biggest gaming regret of this system. I never owned this back in the day, but my brother did, but I never really sort of started it. I used to work with a guy who was absolutely obsessed with this game. It was his first sort of major introduction to gaming, and he would talk about this game all the time, how it was his most favourite game ever. I think I played the game briefly. I think I put the cartridge in and walked around the first sort of area. But unfortunately I never took the time to sit down and really play this game. I'm hoping there's going to be a high-def remake of this game. I know it's absolutely brilliant, and this is another game that, just like Mario, although I haven't really played it, I do like watching speedruns and exploits and stuff for this game. I'm hoping there's going to be a high-def remake on the Nintendo Switch, upgraded textures, that kind of thing. I think they've done that with Wind Waker already, so hopefully that comes along and I'll give this game the time it deserves. Turok was a release game, or very early game for the system, and I actually finished this one back in the day. I think there's kind of a secondary point in the quest where you've got to pick up 4 parts of a scepter, if I remember, and I found all those and finished the game and really enjoyed it. These days, play this on the Nintendo Switch or another console. There's loads of remakes of this one. The controls on this one are a bit horrible. You've got to use the C buttons to move forward and back, and the left stick to sort of look around, and there's not much configuration you can do with that, so the controls are the biggest enemy to this game. The only thing we didn't like about this game back in the day was the amount of fog, and I get why they did it to keep the performance up, but it does really show on this old game. But in the more enclosed levels, it's no trouble at all. I must pick up the sequel to this one as well, Turok 2. I think I finished that one back in the day, and that was also a good game. And it takes advantage of the 4 meg graphics RAM pack as well. I'm not too sure why I picked Command & Conquer up. I've always loved the games on other systems though. The PlayStation version was pretty good. I really loved it on PC. For me, the king of Command & Conquer games is Red Alert 2 on PC. That has never been bettered, although there are other games in the series like Command & Conquer Generals, but Red Alert 2, that's where it is. It seems this game does have its fans though, and I've checked out on YouTube some of the later missions and they actually look really good for the N64. I'm not sure if this game does have mouse support. I don't own a N64 mouse, but these games are always better with a mouse. So much more precise and easier to select things and move around the map. I really enjoyed the N64 release of Quake, and it has support for a feature that I wish all games would have, and that is the texture filter. Here we've got the texture filter off. This is a selectable option where you can turn the N64's filtering off, and I wish all games would have this option. Let's just turn it on and see how the game looks by default. And as you can see, it looks really quite blurry. Some other games gave you the option to do this, or didn't give you the option to do this, by using Game Genie code, so you could switch it off that way, and the games look so much better. To make games look more blurry these days, I just take my glasses off. I never finished this on N64 back in the day, so I'm not sure if it's got every single level of the original PC version, but what is there is really good. And there's also support for a 2-player deathmatch game. The second Quake game came out on the N64 as well, and I'll be honest with you, out of all the games I've played, this is the game where I struggled with the controls the most. Really twitchy, and very difficult to control. Probably not at the time, it's just we've become so accustomed to 2-stick shooters or using keyboard and mouse. Everyone back then seemed to be kind of used to using the inverted setting on sticks as well, so you push up, you look down, you pull back, you look up. I've long since changed to what I think it should be, the standard setting. The textures do look a bit rough in this game though. Definitely prefer the first game over this one. I think it has some slight multiplayer as well. I think you can have 2 players at the same time. Not sure if you can do 4. But those textures clean up nicely on emulation, so that's still the way to go. Turok Rage Wars is a game I picked up pretty much because it was cheap. I played the first 2 games and, as I said earlier, I really enjoyed them. This is basically just an arena shooter, basically to build off the back of games like Goldeneye for 4-player multiplayer. Maybe it was fun back in the day. Playing this as a single player game, no fun whatsoever. Even if it's cheap, I'd skip this one. Just because a game's cheap doesn't mean it's bad though. This is Formula 1 Grand Prix and you can pick this up for probably around £15 boxed with instructions. It's not my usual sort of thing to play with racing games. I do kind of prefer arcade races rather than serious sort of simulation races, but this is a really great little attempt, this one. A bunch of different tracks and really fun to play as well. So with a few pounds it's going to cost you to pick this one up, go and do it. Out of all the games on the Nintendo 64, it's probably Extreme G that was the game that made me go, wow, look at these graphics. Yeah, these graphics, ropey these days, but really impressive for back in the day. I think it was the second level of this game where when you go around the loop, it looked incredible, really, really cool. And although this game is a bit twitchy on the control front, definitely not like Wipeout or something like that, you keep sort of crashing into the walls. It's a fun little game, this one. Different races and stuff, different weapons you can pick up, kind of like Wipeout in that respect. But yeah, I'll always remember this game for the graphics. Really impressive on a small 15-inch TV back in the day. Less so stretched to 50 or 60 inch on a modern TV with the N64's blurry textures, but yeah, a bit of a groundbreaking game, this one for me. Worth picking up. It's got a sequel as well, but the sequel isn't as good as this original. The frame rate is a lot lower. Stick with this one. Now, we all loved Goldeneye on N64, and after that 007 The World Is Not Enough came out. But I didn't know anyone who owned this back in the day. I don't remember anyone playing it. I don't know why, maybe it just skipped us by. I took a look online though, and it does have 4-player multiplayer, so it looks just as much fun as the first game, really. And I sat down to play this for about an hour or so, emulation, just playing it for this video, and it's actually quite good. I actually quite like this game, so I'm going to go back to this one and give it a bit more time. It looks like you've got all the guns and gadgets of the first game. The game doesn't seem to have the same number of fans as the original Goldeneye game, but it looks fun enough to me. Next up is Star Wars Racer, or Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, I think it's also known as. And this is a brilliant racing game. This is brilliant no matter what system you play it on. I was playing this on the PC mostly back in the day, but I had it on the N64 as well, and this is a fantastic racing game. Really enjoyed the mechanics of boosting as fast as you can without engine damage, repairing as you're going, things like that. The battles, the tracks, this one's absolutely fantastic. And you can pick this up on the Nintendo Switch, it's been remastered, and I think it might be available on the Xbox and PS4 as well. Well worth picking up, this one. Diddy Kong Racing as a game I remember as being really expensive. I think I had to trade in 3 or 4 N64 games at my local game shop to get this, but this is a fantastic racer. 4 players at the same time as well. It does get a bit difficult a bit too quickly, as I remember. And I think this game was about £65 or £70 back in the day. Really, really quite expensive. But games were more expensive than CDs. You won't see Mario Kart 64 on this list. I've never been that engaged with it. For me, there is one racing game that is even better. That game, of course, is F-Zero X, and this, in my opinion, is the best racing game on the system. Not only does it run really, really fast, it's also really smooth. You get 60 frames per second on this game, and it's even 60 FPS, even in 4-player modes. And it's got some great tracks, this one. Really cool loops and jumps and stuff. So for a competitive 4-player racing game, 4 players out of the box, remember, with those 4 control ports, this is the one to go for. Now, what is Lilac Wars? Well, Lilac Wars is what Star Fox 64 was called in the UK. I think there was some legal dispute. I think there was an 8-bit game company that had a game Star Fox on it, and they contested the trademark or something like that. So that's why it's called Lilac Wars, at least here in the UK. I think there was a big box release of this game as well. I think it shipped with the Rumble Pack, large style box. It probably was the best use of that Rumble Pack. And this is a big improvement on the first game, the Super Nintendo game Star Fox. Didn't put a huge amount of time into this one, there were other games to play, but another one to add to your collection. Body Harvest is a game that I never got too far in, but in my opinion this is one of the most interesting games on the system. It's kind of got some RPG elements and different camera views and stuff, and I think there's different vehicles and stuff you can get into as well. It does get compared at times to Grand Theft Auto, which I think is probably a little ambitious on this one, but Quite an interesting game, and for me it's the bits where you sort of go in the buildings. There's various buildings around the map you can go into, and there's kind of little puzzles and stuff. That's kind of where I think the game's strengths lie. Forsaken is a game that I remember first playing on a demo disc that was mounted to the cover of a PlayStation magazine. Really quite an interesting demo. You could sort of fly around in 3D space, a proper 3D space, not just up, down, left and right. You could pitch, yaw, roll and stuff. Quite interesting going through these mazes and stuff. So yeah, I do own it on N64 now, but I think back in the day I did pick it up on PlayStation, but as soon as I got the actual game, I didn't like it anywhere near as much as the demo. I don't know what it was about the demo, I don't know, the control system just kind of threw me off when I came to play the full game. But you can pick this one up really cheap, so another one to add. One last game before we get to the top 5 for my Nintendo 64 choices. That game is Perfect Dark. Unfortunately, this came out a little bit too late for us. I think we'd kind of moved on to other systems. I think I was kind of playing PC games at the time. I got my first PC, I was playing things like Quake. So unfortunately this passed us by, but this is actually quite an interesting game. You do need the expansion graphics pack for this one. If you play the game without that, you get a very basic multiplayer mode. So if you add the expansion pack, you get to play the full single player campaign, and there are some more in-depth multiplayer maps as well. You can basically think of this game as Goldeneye 2, that's basically what it is. And it's been remade. I think there's a remake of this on the Xbox 360, and I think you can download it in the store. And although that frame rate struggles a bit at times, it is a great single player game from what I've seen of it. Okay, my top 5 N64 games. Starting out, Shadows of the Empire. I'm not sure if this was a release game or, again, one that came out shortly after, but wow, when we first played this game and there was the Battle of Hoth, the first mission, flying around in a speeder and taking out AT-ATs and stuff, using the tow cable to trip them over, absolutely fantastic. One of the gaming memories that I'll always remember. And it wasn't just that, there was a whole game ahead of you. Third person FPS game, it does get a bit tricky later on, and I remember some of the jumps being a bit tricky, and there's one boss, I can't remember what it was. Maybe it's the battle with the bounty hunter or something like that, but a very, very tricky boss, that one. And there's a bit where you're going around on carts and stuff, jumping between them. Really quite a cool game, and this is definitely worth picking up. Really, really great game. Number 4 is Pilot Wings, and I don't think I've ever met anyone who doesn't like this game. It's just one of those games where if you just fancy taking some time out and just doing nothing, then this is the game for you. It's got this Birdman mode where you're flying around and you can basically just do what you want, just explore, and I really like that. I think I probably spent a bit more time playing the Birdman game than the actual game itself, but it's just really cool, the freedom of being able to go through caves and stuff, under bridges, take pictures and stuff. What a fantastic game this is. I was playing this on my N64 to get a bit of footage for this through my HDMI converter that I mentioned at the start of this video, and all was going well until what I can only describe as the howls of the damned came through my TV. Don't know what quite happened here. Of course this was going to be on the list. Goldeneye 64, probably the biggest system seller on the entire system. I think only Mario 64 sold better than this. This is absolute multiplayer perfection, this one. Back in the day we were at 6th form, we just finished school and we went on to 6th form, and we were all studying our various subjects, but for some reason in 6th form they gave you Monday off. As like a study day. Every week Monday was off, but you had to go in and register. You had to go in, register your name, and they expected you to go off and study for the rest of the day in the library. But no, we go in, meet up, and we'd say basically, where are we playing Goldeneye today? Sometimes around my house, sometimes around my friend's house, but 4-player Goldies, Goldeneye multiplayer, proximity mines, one shot, one kill, the stack map, which is my personal favourite multiplayer map, and the facility map, the second map in the game, probably the most iconic of them all. Movie licenses never really tend to work out that well for games, but I don't know what happened here, they absolutely struck gold. I'm sure I'll cover the unreleased remake on Xbox 360 at some point. And this game's got a huge following for speedrunning as well, and I keep up to date with that, see who's doing the best and knocking fractions of a second off. What a game. And I'm sure many people will put this game at number 1. Now, a lot of people are a bit lukewarm on this game. When this episode started, you got the intro of Killer Instinct, available in 1995, Killer Instinct on the Nintendo Ultra 64. That game never came out, but the sequel, Killer Instinct 2, was released as Killer Instinct Gold on the N64. And this is probably one of my earliest memories of the system. My brother had got the N64 and maybe a couple of games, and the local video rental place, Video Solent, rented out N64 games. And I was reading about Killer Instinct Gold because I played the first game on Super Nintendo, and I really enjoyed it. So I picked this up from a rental, and honestly, it's probably the best fighting game I've ever played, this one. The various special moves, but the combos, how they fit together, how they chain together so you can make ridiculous ultra combos on this. I just don't think it's ever been bettered. You can play this as just a normal Street Fighter 2 clone, but you can really get into the mechanics of it. The combo breakers, chainers, linkers, ultimate combos, juggles. There's just so much to this game. It's pretty much perfection, and it plays really well on the D-pad, especially with the 6 face buttons of the N64 as well. So that was my number 2 pick. But what's number 1? My number 1 spot goes to Mystical Ninja 64, or Mystical Ninja starring Goemon as it's known in some areas. This is a fantastic game. This is probably why I wasn't playing Super Mario 64. This was the answer to it, in my opinion. This was the better game. And this is a game I'm starting to see on other people's N64 lists as well, so it's definitely got its fans out there. It's quite a big game, this one. You go all around Japan, taking out castles, bosses, bad guys. There's 4 different characters in this game that you can select. Each has got their own abilities to help you progress further in the game. A bunch of secrets, and the soundtrack of this game is the best soundtrack on the system, I think. Really catchy. So when I look back at all the N64 games I've played, it's probably this one I have put the most time into, and it's the one that I enjoy the most. And I need to go back through it again and play it all the way through. I remember back in the day I did try and play it a second time, but unfortunately it was about the time when the N64 save packs were starting to die, the backup batteries, so I put about 4 to 6 hours into it, the game, and I lost it. And that was the last time I properly played it all the way through, so I do need to play it through on emulation, upscaled, 4K, save states, things like that. But a great game, and that's why it's number 1 for me. So what's my overall thoughts on the N64? Well, it hasn't got the largest game library, to be honest. You can probably finish it fairly easy. There's only a few titles that are very expensive to buy. And there's not really that many that I'm looking to buy myself. Maybe Turok 2 I would like to own at some point again, which is fairly cheap. I can pick that up easy enough. And the only other game I'm interested in getting is Shadowgate 64. Now, my brother had the N64 copier where you could load games off a CD. And one of those games that I was interested in, but only realised its name years later, was Shadowgate 64. It's a very unique game, escaping a dungeon, using items to get past obstacles. Really quite interesting. Goes for about £50 upwards, but one I would like to own. So the main shortcoming of the Nintendo 64 was that cartridge format. I think the largest cartridge was 64 megabytes, which was Resident Evil 2. Compare that with Sony PlayStation games. A CD back then was 650 meg, later 700. And although this was a very successful system with a lot of fun games, especially multiplayer games, I do genuinely think it was Final Fantasy VII on the Sony PlayStation that killed it. Just comparing the complexity of a game like that with full motion video, you know, at the time it really did put an end to cartridges. That was it. Storage space was required. It really was starting to restrict how complex games could be. But I'd like to know some of your thoughts on the N64. What were your go-to games back in the day? Single player, multiplayer? Those legendary GoldenEye multiplayer games when you're all sat on the couch together. Someone throws a proximity mine there. These are just great memories of a great system. But that's going to do me for now, so take it easy and I'll see you guys next time.